Now, as we continue in the Song of Solomon, we have finished scene number 3. Our curtain is going to close as she is there in her bedroom in the tent getting ready for bed. And then what she's going to do, our curtain is going to open again. We're going to have scene number 4 in chapter 3. And she is in bed, she is asleep, and she is dreaming. She is dreaming about what life will be like in the city. And every woman who's ever been in love has had this type of a dream. These are our feminine dreams. The dreams of someone in love, someone who is maturing sexually and is getting ready for marriage. Every girl dreams about what is life going to be like with this man I'm thinking about. She visualizes marriage with him and the different qualities of it. So what we're going to see is that the Shulammite in her dream, she's going to dream about being in the city without the shepherd, and she's going to search for him. Then she's going to find him. And then when she wakes up the next morning, she's going to tell the maidens when they come in the room to check on her and to get her ready for the day. She's going to come back to the theme of the Song of Solomon, do not arouse or awaken love. So let's notice her dream in chapter 3, verse 1. She says, on my bed, night after night, I sought him whom my soul loves. So we know she's talking about the shepherd because he's the one whom her soul loves. And notice she says night after night. She's visualizing life in the city. It's not just going to be one time during my trip to the city that I'm going to miss him, but I'm just going to miss him for forever nearly. Just night after night, I'm going to be longing for him and missing him. Then in verse 2 she says, I must arise now and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares. I must seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but did not find him. So in her dream, she visualizes herself getting up and wandering around the city at night, looking for the shepherd. Then in verse 3 it says, the watchmen who make the rounds in the city found me. And I said, have you seen him whom my soul loves? So she finds the watchmen and asks them, asking everybody, where is this man I love? Verse 4, scarcely had I left them when I found him whom my soul loves. I held on to him and would not let him go until I had brought him to my mother's house and into the room of her who conceived me. So in her dream, she finds the shepherd, and when she finally finds him, she is so excited. She just grabs a hold of him, and she takes him home to mother. Now, some of your commentators talk about here it is talking about taking him home to mother as opposed to mother and father. Remember, I've said that this is a real story about real people. And they believe that her father is probably dead because he is never mentioned in the story. It's always talking about her mother. This is probably also why her brothers were making her work in the vineyard, because they had taken on the responsibilities of their father, and so they were now functioning in this way. So the idea is more of taking him home to her parents, and she only has one parent. You know, a lot of times teenagers or even older people who are dating are kind of reluctant to take their date home for their parents because they're afraid of their parents' disapproval. But Sue, we'll pick on you down here. If Melissa brings a boy home, what kind of boy do you want her to bring home? You want her to bring home one that's going to beat her and not provide for her and mistreat her?
No, not at all.
Okay, what kind of boy do you want for her?
Someone that will provide well and love her and take care of her.
Okay, so you're pretty particular about what you want for her, aren't you? And this is the way of all parents. They really want someone special for their child, for their daughter, and for their son. So when we get our parents' approval of the man we're dating, that means something really great, because our parents want us to be happy. And if anything, our parents are going to be too picky because they think we're great and we're super because we're their child, and they want us to marry just the best possible person. So for a person to bring their date home for their parents' approval and to get that parents' approval is no guarantee, but it means a lot, because the parents have had some experiences of life and aren't going to be as fooled as easily sometimes as teenagers are, simply because, as we talked in an earlier class, this is a time of first for teenagers. First date, first kiss, first heartbreak. They don't have the experience to fall back upon to recognize some danger signs. So having a parent's approval is something that is important. Now, teenagers sometimes in talking about dating, there's a lot of times there's a lot of peer pressure on choosing a boyfriend. I had a teenager come up to me after class one time and tell me, she says, you wouldn't believe the peer pressure there is in high school on dating. She says a lot of boys will not even date a girl unless all the other boys give her a good approval. They date her strictly based upon what the other boys are saying. And so there is tremendous peer pressure on who you're going to date. And this is what the Shulammite is feeling here. She is feeling the peer pressure of these maidens who are in love with Solomon. They think he's a wonderful catch. Why, certainly you'd want to marry Solomon. So we come down to chapter 3, verse 5, to the theme of the book again. This is the second time it is given. And she says, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem. Adjure means just to pledge yourself 7 times. Make this promise. That by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, and the gazelles and the hinds are the male and the female antelope, by what is natural out in nature, you make this promise, that you will not arouse or awaken my love until she or it pleases. Now, before class, someone asked me about where it says until she pleases, that their Bible says until he pleases. Out in the footnote of the New American Standard, it says, let me find it here. Okay, it says, or it. So this pronoun is really kind of an indefinite pronoun. No one can tell whether it is she, he, or it. And the context is probably such that it should be it. That's talking about love, that you will not arouse or awaken my love until love is there, until love is ready. So the pronoun goes back to the word love. And however you want to refer to love, then that's the pronoun that you would fit in there. So she is telling these maidens, whatever you do, do not force Solomon upon me. If I go back to the city and I don't love him, then all I'm going to do is I'm going to dream about the shepherd, and I am going to be so miserable that I am going to be very unhappy. So let love come naturally. Now, as we talk about peer pressure in school, I don't know if you get Luann in your newspapers or not, but here's Luann, a typical teenager, and she's talking to her friend Delta, and she says, sometimes you're a little too forceful, Delta. And here we have what Delta is doing, is carrying Luann in a chair, trying to help her meet this boy over here. And Delta says, sometimes that's what it takes. So sometimes teenagers are kind of forceful, and as they exert peer pressure on each other to find the right boyfriend and the right girlfriend. Now, as we continue in the Song of Solomon, what is going to happen here in verse 6, part 2, second day or next day, scene 1. And what's going to happen, she's going to get up and she's going to get ready, and Solomon is going to take her back to his palace. His palace is either in Jerusalem or one of his summer palaces. And basically what we're going to see is, as they're going to see them traveling, returning to Jerusalem, Solomon is going to come again and talk to her. He's going to admire her great beauty. Then she's going to do what every girl should do in a situation like this when she receives a sensuous proposal, is to say, I need time to think this over. Solomon tells her, that's okay. You think all you want, but you are still just extraordinarily beautiful. He's going to praise her flawless beauty. So the first thing we want to notice is their return to Jerusalem in Song of Solomon, chapter 3, verses 6 through 11. Okay, as we read along here, it says, what is this coming up from the wilderness, like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all scented powders of the merchant? Now this is describing in poetic language something really very literal. People back at this time who were rich, and Solomon, as we've seen, is just extremely rich. When they traveled, then they had servants or slaves who walked in front of the traveling couch with pouches full of either flower petals or herbs. And as they would walk in front of the rich man's couch, they were continually reaching down into their pouch and grabbing a handful of herbs or flower petals and throwing them up into the air, so that when the rich man's couch would go through that air a little bit later, it would have this smell, this pleasant smell. So instead of having room fresheners or car fresheners in their car, then they had these servants throwing these petals up into the air. So if you were to look off, and you just picture looking off into the distance and seeing a rich man traveling, what you're going to see is these columns of smoke continually going up into the air, this sweet-smelling columns of smoke because he's traveling this way. And so what this is, we're going to see that who is talking here. If you want to write out in the margin, who is talking. This is the country people. Remember, Solomon is out in the country. This is where he has found the Shulammite maiden. Instead of us having a narration telling us then Solomon took her back to Jerusalem or wherever his summer palace was, then the country people are going to tell us what is happening. And we are seeing their attitude. They are very curious. They are very amazed. And this is just like when we all go to town to see a parade, to see the people march by, and it's something that's exciting to us. Then this was their parade, something that was exciting to them. And just picture all the country people running out to the edge of the road to watch this parade of Solomon. Solomon is going back into town, something very magnificent to see. You're seeing all of these columns of smoke. Then in verse 7 it says, "Behold, it is the traveling couch of Solomon, 60 mighty men around it, all of the mighty men of Israel. All of them are wielders of the sword, expert in war. Each man has his sword at his side, guarding against the terrors of the night." So here it is. Not only have you got these columns of smoke going up into the air, you've got 60 soldiers all dressed up in their war gear, protecting Solomon from the terrors of the night. And remember how we talked earlier about how Solomon's soldiers, how their shields were made out of gold? So this was a magnificent sight to see all these soldiers marching along to protect Solomon. Then it says in verse 9, it says, "King Solomon has made for himself a sedan chair from the timber of Lebanon. He has made its posts of silver, its back of gold, and its seat of purple fabric." Just imagine how magnificent his seat was, made with silver and gold and rich purple fabric. This is really quite a sight for these people to be seeing. And it says, "with its interior lovingly fitted out by the daughters of Jerusalem." So all these maidens who are waiting for their turn to be Solomon's wife, then they have just decorated and designed this traveling couch just beyond description. Very gorgeous and beautiful. In verse 11, it says, "Go forth, O daughters of Zion, and gaze on King Solomon with the crown." So here it is. Yeah, run out and see Solomon. This is really a sight to be seen. Go out and gaze on him. It says, "with his crown, with which his mother has crowned him on the day of his wedding and on the day of the gladness of his heart." So here it is. They are aware that Solomon is taking the Shulamite back with him to be one of his queens. And so they're curious about her too. Go see the new maiden that Solomon has picked out. Go see this magnificent sight, and they know what is happening. Now this is very important for us to realize what the country people are seeing and their curiosity and what they are feeling. Because when the Shulamite comes back from Jerusalem or from Solomon's summer palace, wherever she is, they are again going to notice. And because of their curiosity here, they are going to be even more curious about why she is coming back with the shepherd, and they are going to want to know what it is that has happened to you. Let's see. Lost my place here. Scene number 2. Okay, we just finished scene number 1, and we're ready to talk about scene number 2. The curtains have closed on their traveling couch. They're going to open again now for scene number 2, Song of Solomon chapter 4, verse 1. And Solomon is going to again, as you see up here, they've returned to Jerusalem. He's going to, in this scene, he's going to admire her beauty. She's going to tell him she wants time to think, and then he's going to praise her flawless beauty. So scene number 3 is Solomon talking to the Shulamite somewhere in the palace. So you can just picture in your mind some type of an ornate, beautiful palace scene, and Solomon is talking to her there surrounded by all of this luxury. In Song of Solomon chapter 4 verse 1, he says, "How beautiful you are, my darling. How beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil." So here again, he's focusing in on her outward beauty, her physical appearance. Your eyes are like doves. He's noticing the peaceful quality about the way she looks at him, something that we're going to see all the way through the Song of Solomon. The way a man looks at a woman or the way a woman looks at a man is very important to him. Then as we continue in that verse, it says, "Your hair is like a flock of goats that have descended from Mount Gilead." Now, this is a poetic description that when you think about it is very literal. The most common color for their goats was black, so she probably had very dark or black hair. And as you think about a person's long hair, long curly hair, then it's going to look like a bunch of goats coming down from a mountain. So he is describing her in a very poetic way, and we can see her long curly black hair. Okay, verse 2, your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn ewes, which have come up from their washing, all of which bear twins, and not one of them has lost her young. So she doesn't have any teeth missing. They're pretty and white, look like a bunch of newly washed lambs, and so he's admiring her teeth. Verse 3, your lips are like a scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your temples are like a slice of pomegranate behind your veil. So he admires her lips and the shape and the color of it. Her temples are like a slice of pomegranate. Pomegranate is a very smooth fruit, so he's probably admiring her flawless complexion along with the color of it. He appreciates the color of her complexion. Then he says, your neck is like the Tower of David. So here it is. She probably had a long, slender neck. And her neck is built, and it says, and it's built with rows of stones on which are hung 1,000 shields, all the round shields of the mighty men. So what he's describing here is her necklace. It's very easy to visualize her necklace from the way he describes. He said, built with rows of stones. So around her neck, she's probably got a bunch of beads. These are the rows of stones, several layers of beads. And then on these beads are hung like the round shields of the mighty men. And if we talked before about their shields were gold, so it's probably a golden necklace. The gold, it probably has golden shields, and you've seen the oriental necklaces with the round discs hanging from them. So this is probably what he's describing, a necklace that the maidens have probably put on her and given her to adorn her for Solomon. So he is noticing her necklace. Then he says in verse 5, your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle, which feed among the lilies. So here it is. She is a well-developed, mature girl, and he is noticing her shape, and he's pointing this out to her. So Solomon gives her this very sensuous plea. You are so beautiful, and he describes her beauty so that she will see what he means. Then in verse 6 is the Shulammite speaking, and she gives Solomon her response. And this is a response every young girl or older girl either should have to a very sensuous proposal. She says, until the cool of the day when the shadows flee away. When is that? That's evening time, isn't it? So she says, until evening, she says, I will go my way to the mountain of mirth and to the hill of frankincense. And you remember I told you how that the Jews had their gardens outside their cities, and no doubt Solomon has gardens in and around his palace. In fact, in Ecclesiastes, it talks about all the gardens that Solomon had built. So this is something that, yes.
Now, how do you know that the speaker changes at that point?
Because the language is changing, and then she's saying I, and then in verse 7 he says you again. Solomon is going to come back. So the language is following a certain pattern, then it's like we have something inserted, and then it's going to come back and follow that same pattern again, like he was interrupted or he finished and she responded. And so she's saying, I'll go my way to one of these mountains. I'm going to go to a garden, and I'm going to think this over. I want to have time to think. Verse 7, Solomon comes back, and he's saying, okay, you just go and think all you want, but in verse 7, you are altogether beautiful, my darling, and there is no blemish in you. So you can just go and think all you want to, but I'm not going to change my mind. You are so physically perfect. There is no blemish, and there's no way that I would change my mind. And so the curtain closes. This is the end of scene number 2. Scene number 3, when the curtain opens again, where do you think this scene would take place when it opens again? She's just told us where she's going. She's going to the garden. So when the scene opens again, she is going to be in the garden. And what do you think she's going to be thinking about as she follows the pattern all the way through here? She's going to be, thinking about the shepherd, comparing it to the shepherd. So I want to show you here what she's going to be doing in this scene. Scene number 3 begins with verse 8, if you wanted to write that in your Bibles. Okay, she's in the garden. She's going to think about the shepherd's second proposal. This is the second proposal we've heard from him. She's going to remember how he enjoys her company, how he treasures the glance of her eyes, how he also notices her appearance. And we've talked about how appearance is important. We're not depreciating that. And then also, he values her love. So the shepherd does not focus just on her appearance. He focuses on these other things too. And he is going to value her love. And so we will see as we read this here, as she's in the garden, scene number 3, verse number 8. Says, "Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. May you come with me from Lebanon. Journey down from the summit of Ammon, from the summit of Sinnar and Hermon, from the dens of lions and from the mountains of leopards." Now what he is saying is just exactly what he was saying earlier about, oh my dove, and the clefts of the steep places. He's talking about how she's inaccessible. Come be with me. I need you. I enjoy your company and I want to be with you. So she's just very poetic language telling her that he wants her to make herself be accessible. Then in verse 9, he says, "You have made my heart beat faster, my sister, my bride." So he's talking about these feelings of love that everyone gets, especially with new love. He says, "You've made my heart beat faster, my sister, my bride." And notice that he calls her my sister, my bride. You're someone that I have something in common with. We've both grown up together in the country and we have a common background. And then my bride. You're someone I want to spend the rest of my life with. He is viewing her as someone to have a permanent attachment with. And so then he says, "You've made my heart beat faster. With my sister, my bride, you made my heart beat faster with a single glance of your eyes." So the way she looks at him, we keep seeing this over and over in the Song of Solomon. The way she looks at him is very important to him. A woman can be saying something with her mouth, but if her eyes are saying something different, a man is going to believe the way a woman looks at him before he will believe what she says. So a lot of times a woman's eyes betray her words. She may be saying the right words because she knows that's what she should say, but her heart is not in it, and men are very sensitive to this. And we are seeing this all the way through the Song of Solomon. And then he says, "With a single strand of your necklace." Now notice the difference between the necklace he describes and the necklace Solomon described. Solomon described a very wealthy, impressive necklace, and the shepherd is describing a single strand of your necklace. A necklace that was hers, that belonged to her, that a country girl would wear. You don't have to have this fabulous jewelry on to be beautiful to me. Just these little simple feminine touches that you can afford, that you add to your appearance. This makes my heart beat faster. These are enough for you to adorn yourself with. Then he says, would one of you ladies get that for us, please? Okay. Then he says, "How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride." So here it is, her love, her emotional involvement with him is important. "How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than all kinds of spices." So her love is something that is extremely important to him, and her emotional involvement, her caring for him. Then he says, "Your lips, my bride, drip honey. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon." Here again, we have that charm that we talked about over in Proverbs 31, how that every woman has got to have this charm in order to attract a man's attention. We're not going to talk about what's involved in this charm yet, because we're going to spend a lot of time in a later class developing an understanding of this charm, because it is extremely important. But notice that the Shulammite has this charm for the shepherd, that her lips, they drip honey. They say sweet things that he likes to hear. But not only is there honey, but there's also milk. Milk is a life-sustaining substance. So she's not shallow in the way she talks to him. She's got true, genuine caring for him, and her lips drip honey. Now, as we continue to think about the shepherd's proposal to the Shulamite, then there is something else that he notices that is very important to him. And that is, he guards or protects her purity. And we see this in the Song of Solomon, chapter 4, verse 12. And here it is, he says, "A garden locked is my sister, my bride. A rock garden locked, a spring sealed up." And we can turn back over to Proverbs 5, and we can see that the Jews used the example of a cistern or a spring in order to talk about a woman's sexual nature. In Proverbs 5, verse 15, is talking about an older woman and how it is she can ravish and satisfy her husband's needs. In verse 15 it says, Drink water from your own cistern and fresh water from your own well. Should your springs be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets? So this was a common figure for the Jews to refer to a woman's sexual nature as a spring, something to be protected, or a cistern, something to be protected. Here it is, the shepherd says, "You are a garden locked, is my sister, my bride." A rock garden locked, a spring sealed up. He is recognizing that her sexual favors are sealed up. They don't belong to him. They don't belong to Solomon. They don't belong to any man until she makes that commitment in marriage. So he is recognizing her purity. And this is something that he is valuing in her. And this is something that young couples, dating couples, is something that they need to do when they start to get serious with each other, is to make a commitment to protect each other sexually, to protect their purity. Obviously, the Shulammite and the shepherd have talked about this because she is remembering him saying this. And courting couples, when they're dating, they need to talk about, I'm wanting to remain pure in this relationship, and I want you to help me, and to you not be placing me in situations where I'm going to be tempted. Because this is something that is healthy. Sometimes the girl may be feeling stronger than the boy. At other times he may be feeling stronger than her, and they need to protect each other. When my husband and I were dating, the high school that I went to, the girls wore pants back then, but the high school I went to, it was against the dress code to wear pants. So girls always wore dresses to school. And the styles back then were a little different than they are now. And I had a lot of dresses that had low necklines, scooped out necklines. And so as I was dating my boyfriend, who later became my husband, one day he asked me, he says, "I wish you would quit wearing those low-necked dresses." He says, "They are really making it very hard on me." Well, being a girl, I didn't know how boys thought, and that was all news to me, but it was good that he told me that. And as we were continuing to discuss this subject, he says, "I just wish that God had put a girl's breasts on her back, and then they wouldn't cause so much trouble." But after he told me that, I says, well, it says, if God had put a girl's breasts on her back, it says, when you put your arms around me, your hands would probably get into trouble. So God probably knew what he was doing when he put them on her front. But anyway, the point I'm making is that we need to have conversations like this with the fellow we're dating in order to protect one another, because we don't know how boys feel. In fact, one of your assignments is you're going to have to go home and ask your father or your husband or your boyfriend how they think along this line, because as girls, we really don't have an appreciation for what causes boys problems. I want us to take a little bit of time right now, and while we're talking about purity, and to talk about what is fornication. And if the paper that I passed you out earlier about fornication, I would like for you to get that out now. And before we start this, I want to tell you that I'm going to be very plain as we talk about this. As I have been teaching classes over the years on the sexual relationship, I have many times asked married women, in trying to determine what it is, how plain I need to be, I've asked married women, if I beat around the bush and hint at what needs to be said, will you know what I'm talking about? And married women have invariably told me, no, we want you to be plain. If married women are not going to know what I'm talking about if I hint and beat around the bush, then I think that is probably especially true among young girls. So I am going to be very plain, because this is something very important that we're talking about. Fornication is something that we hear a lot about, and we think that we know what fornication is. But I want us to really look at this word, because a lot of times I think we have a very shallow understanding of what's involved in fornication. Up here I have 1 Corinthians 6:18, where it says, "Flee immorality." This is the New American Standard Translation, or fornication, which is the King James translation. "Every other sin that a man commits is outside the body, but the immoral man sins against his own body." In a later class, we're going to be talking about just exactly how fornication is a sin against the whole body, about how it is we hurt ourselves personally if we're involved in the sin. But that is not what we're going to be talking about today. Today, we're just going to simply be defining fornication. What is fornication? Okay, when you look up the word fornication in Thayer's lexicon, Thayer says that fornication means illicit sexual intercourse in general. The problem we run into is that Thayer's lexicon was written in 1885, and words change over a period of time. And this word intercourse means something different to us today than it meant in 1885. In order to just give you an example of how words change, when I started writing Volume 2 on Learning to Love, I had a word in there defined, the word celibate. And celibate used to mean not married. That you could be celibate and you could just fornicate and engage in all kinds of illicit sexual activity all the time, and you were still celibate because you were not married. And as I was having some people go through Volume 2, critiquing it for me, I had some people question me on celibate. Are you sure you're using this word correctly? And I called libraries and got their dictionaries and stuff. And what I found was that my dictionary, that was 20 years old, was no longer current with the way the word celibate had changed in just 20 years of usage. And as I have been teaching this material and reading Ann Landers and Dear Abby over this 20-year period of time, I think that Ann Landers and Dear Abby had a lot to do with the way that word has changed in our society today, because they use it in their column a lot and they would misuse it. And over the years, every time I see them misuse it, I say, oh, I ought to write them a letter and tell them they're misusing that word, but I never did, and they kept on using it. And when I went out and bought a new dictionary a couple of years ago, because I was writing Volume 2, the definition of celibate had changed. The definition of celibate had gone from meaning not married to meaning not engaging in the sexual relationship. And now the last meaning for celibate today is not married. And so this word has changed in just 20 years of time, going from not married to just meaning you can be married and be celibate, now just meaning you're not engaging in the sexual relationship. So if a word like that can change in 20 years because two women misuse it in their column all the time and are influencing society, then other words are going to change also. And so the point I'm making is that the word for intercourse, what it meant a little more than 100 years ago, it meant something very different to people when Thayer wrote his lexicon than it means to us today. Up here, if you want to write this on your paper, this Webster's definition that I have up here next, I'm going to read to you, is the definition of the word intercourse, not fornication. And I should have made that a little bit plainer. So if you want to write out in your margin that this definition is for intercourse. In the modern dictionary today, intercourse means connection or dealings with persons or groups, exchange especially of thoughts and feelings, communion. Now, the first and second definitions used to be what intercourse meant, all of what intercourse meant. The word has changed. The third meaning of it is physical sexual contact between individuals that involves the genitalia of at least one person. This third definition is what we think intercourse means. And this is not the meaning of intercourse 100 years ago. 100 years ago, it was the first and the second meaning. For example, we have a city in our nation called Intercourse, Pennsylvania. When Intercourse, Pennsylvania got its name, intercourse did not mean sexual contact. It meant a bustling activity, an industrious type of city. So Intercourse, Pennsylvania was very proud of how industrious they were, the bustling activity that they had. So if we were going to change Thayer's definition to make it current with our modern times, we would say fornication means illicit sexual activity in general. So it would be illicit sexual activity in general. And what we're going to do now is we are going to look at two passages in our Bible that show us that this is the way God also uses this word. It is not limited to intercourse involving the genitalia of at least one person. Okay, as we continue down on our chart, the first passage that we're going to look at is Ezekiel 23, verse 3. And if you would like to write out in the margin beside Ezekiel 23, verse 3, this is describing what fornication is for the woman. You look down on your chart a little bit and you will see Ezekiel 23, verse 8. And you can write out in the margin on that one for the man. That passage is describing what fornication is for the man. So the first one we're going to look at is God's definition of fornication for the woman. Okay, in Ezekiel 23, verse 3, and you're going to notice a bunch of numbers in parenthesis up here. And what these numbers are, these are Strong's identifying marks for his dictionary of what these words mean. And I went ahead and put them up here because some of these words are so similar, it makes it easy for us to keep them straight and to not get confused. So we will just ignore those for the time being. Okay, as you read this passage, it says, and they played the harlot in Egypt. Okay, what he's talking about here, God is talking about the Israelites, about how they played spiritual harlotry, how they got involved in idolatry and forsook God as their true and one God. So he's using the subject of fornication and harlotry to teach us a spiritual truth, but he is teaching us something about fornication that we can learn from that also. It says, and they played the harlot in Egypt, they played the harlot in their youth. There their breasts were pressed, and there their virgin bosom was handled. What I want you to notice is the word harlot. Both words harlot up here come from a form of word number 8457. If you will look down on your page, you will see a word that is numbered 8457, except it is translated lust or whoredom. You see the same number, 8457. So these all come from the same Hebrew word. This means harlotry, i.e. figuratively it's used of idolatry, which is the way it's being used in this passage figuratively for idolatry. Then, as you notice, anytime you see in Strong's dictionary, you see this colon followed by a dash. Anytime you see the colon followed by a dash, what that means is the following words are the words that your Bible translates this Hebrew word with. So these are words, if you were going to look them up in a concordance, these are words to look up because they are the way your translators translated this Hebrew word. Okay? So this word, lust or whoredom, is translated with fornication or whoredom. So we are talking about, when we read harlotry and harlotries, we are talking about fornication. And then it says the literal meaning is illicit heterosexual intercourse from the theological word book. So we're talking about our same word, and by going to these passages we can see exactly what is involved in fornication. Okay, we come back to Ezekiel 23 verse 3. And he's talking about the women playing the harlot, being involved in fornication, and he's telling what they did. What they did was their breasts were pressed, and their virgin bosom was handled. I want you to notice, first of all, that God considers a woman's breast or her bosom to be part of her virginity. If it has been unhandled by a man, then she is still a virgin in that area. So virginity is a lot more than just penetration by the man. It also includes the handling of the woman's breast. So we need to think about our breasts in that way. A young girl, that her breasts are part of her virginity. Now, I want us to notice that there are two different words for breasts up here that have two entirely different meanings, two entirely different ideas with them. This first word for breast, 7699, let's see, right here it is. We look at this word. It means the breast of a woman or animal as bulging. This is just a plain old biological term. If you were going to dissect a pig in your biology class and label its different parts, then this is the words you would use for a pig's breast. So these are just plain old biological terms, or if you want a medical term, it's a medical term. This word for breast is used 8 times in the Song of Solomon. When a Shulammite talks about the shepherd is like a cluster of henna blossoms which lies all night between my breasts, it's this breast. When Solomon describes her breasts all the way through there, Solomon uses this word for breast. It's a plain old biological term. Now, the second word for breast or bosom is a different word, and it's number 1717. We look down here to see it, and it means, and incidentally, this is her virgin breast, and you look up the word virgin. Virgin means a virgin from her privacy, and so it's she's keeping her breast private. She's not allowing men or boys to handle them, this sort of thing. Okay, the word bosom down here, 1717, means the breast as the seat of love. And this is talking about giving the breast with an attitude of love. And we can see both of these type of breasts are used in Song of Solomon chapter 19, and we can see, or not Song of Solomon, Proverbs 5:19, and we can see the significance of this if we'll turn over there. Proverbs 5:19 is where we were earlier, where it's talking about an older woman, what she has to satisfy her husband that a different woman every night doesn't. In Proverbs 5:19 it says, as a loving hind and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. This first breast in verse 19 is the one that is the seat of love. The older woman is giving her body and her breast to her husband as an act of love. Love is involved. There is emotion involved in giving her body. Then, as you look down in verse 20, here's the contrast. For why should you, my son, be exhilarated with an adulteress and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? This word bosom is the biological term. There is no emotion at all involved. Why, my son, should you embrace this beautiful body? Why should you be carried away with this? The thing that captures a man's heart and satisfies him with a woman is the attitude behind giving her body. And so these two types of breasts are contrasted in that particular passage. So the significance of what we're saying is that it doesn't really matter why a woman gives her breast to a boy. If she gives it to him, use this plain old biological term just for a physical thrill, a sexual thrill, if that's the why she gives it to him, or if she gives him her breast because she loves him and she thinks that someday they're going to get married, it really doesn't matter. This is still part of fornication. The motive behind it is not important. God has it all covered, and we need to realize that this is part of fornication. Okay, does anybody have a question or a comment before we go to the next chart? Okay, we go to the next chart, the next verse, Ezekiel 23:8. Then we're going to look at the man's half to see what's involved in fornication for the man. He says, Ezekiel 23:8, and she did not forsake her harlotries from the time in Egypt, for in her youth men had lain with her, and they handled her virgin bosom, and poured out their lusts on her. And of course, this harlotries and the lust are still part of our word, fornication. We're still dealing with the same thing. These are two things that are involved when a man is involved in fornication. The first thing up here is he had lain with her. Now, I did not look up this word lain when I made this chart, so it's not on your chart. I did look it up yesterday, and it just means to lay, like to lay down and take a nap, or to lay, to have sexual relationships with someone. So it is talking about the men that when they are involved in sexual penetration, this is part of fornication. Also, when a man is handling a woman's breast, he is involved in fornication. They handled her virgin bosom. And bosom here is, let's see which word that is. I think that's the biological term, isn't it? No, it's an emotion involved. So if he's handling her, so you've got emotion involved right here. His bosom is the seat of love. So if he's doing all of these things because he's emotionally involved with her, then this is still part of fornication. So we need to realize that the attitude does not make it right. Okay, and as we think about handling and fondling, this sort of thing, that this is in part of fornication, in a little later class we're going to be talking about how doing some of these things is personally harmful to us, how that it can affect our ability to respond later on and cause problems. My husband and myself, in all of our travels in the many places that we have lived, we met a young girl one time that was having some serious marriage problems. And she'd only been married about a year. And in the course of our talking to her to find out what the problem was, it came out that this girl had gone off to a religious college to school, a college that is run by members of the church. And while she was there, she met a professor. And this professor convinced her that she could go to a motel with him and that they could both take off their clothes and they could do anything they wanted to do to each other. But as long as penetration did not happen, then they were not sinning, and it was not a sin. It was not fornication. So this girl was involved with this man this way for quite a long period of time. And this man, after a period of time, he was found out. There was a big scandal about it where she lived in her hometown. There was also a scandal at the school about it, and he was fired. They also found out that he had been doing this with other girls on a regular basis. And this was a professor who was married. So this girl had this in her past, and she got married. And as she was living with her husband and having relationships with him, she began to have a lot of problems because of the guilt that was coming from this. And the thing that made her really realize how horrible that what she was doing was, and that it was not as innocent as this professor had made her to believe, is that she began to have orgasms with her husband. And when she did that, she realized that she had also had orgasms with the professor when he he was just fondling her. And she began to realize that this was not as innocent an act as she had thought it was. So this is something that is very serious. It's something that causes serious problems, and cause problems way on down the line for marriage. And something a young girl should think about as she thinks about preserving her body for her husband to be 100% a virgin. One of the nicest memories a young girl can have is when she gets married and her husband touches her breast for the first time. She can remember what he said, the way he touched her, and it is really a very beautiful memory to have to treasure all of your life. It's a beautiful memory to remind him of every once in a while. You remember the first time you touched my breast. You remember what you said. You remember what you did. And this is really a very wonderful memory to cherish. And so we need to think about that and to make that commitment to ourselves. As I close our lesson today, I want to share with you 2 articles that help emphasize what we're talking about. One article, this article comes from Tennessee, the Bible Belt. And the title of this article is Cohabitors 80% More Likely to Divorce. This article says couples who live together before marrying have nearly an 80% higher divorce rate than those who did not, according to a study of Swedish women by the National Bureau of Economic Research. We are not saying in any way that cohabiting causes higher divorce rates, said Neil Bennett, who teaches sociology at Yale University and is one of the study's 3 authors. What we are saying is that it appears that people who cohabit prematurely are less committed to the institution and are more inclined to divorce than people who don't live together. And so if you cohabit thinking this is going to win a boyfriend, then all you're doing is increasing your odds of getting a divorce, making it 80% more likely than of people who do not live together ahead of time. Okay, I have an article here by Dr. Ruth. Dr. Ruth is someone, usually you quote her to give an example of something not to do. Here's one time when she kind of fools us and has actually some good advice. A young man wrote to Dr. Ruth and he said, I have had a lovely red-headed girlfriend for a year now. I love her so much, but she does not believe in premarital sex. What can I do? How can I cope with not knowing if we are sexually compatible? We do plan to get married. Here's Dr. Ruth's answer. She says, most people who love each other are sexually compatible. If you are a loving fiancé to that delightful redhead, and this is what she has decided, then just count the days to your wedding. If you are as loving as you say and a responsible fiancé, you won't put pressure on her. Respect her right to decide not to have sex before the honeymoon. From then until you are both old, there will be years of wonderful lovemaking. Okay? I am not making up fairy tales. That is hard-headed advice. Unless there is something very specific worrying you that you haven't told me, don't worry about sexual compatibility. In this real world, many loving couples don't have premarital sex together. If they love each other, they can do what it says in that old song, what comes naturally when the time comes. If they get along with each other and are informed about sex, from reading my column, she says, which we might question that. And then she says, in some of the excellent books about married love, they can learn together and have the most wonderful physical sharing. Stop worrying, inform yourself, and look forward to a wonderful life. So even Dr. Ruth says that you don't have to cohabit to find out if you're sexually compatible. If you've got the right attitude, and we're going to be seeing that in later classes, she says you're going to be sexually compatible. So I'm going to stop right there for today.